I had triplets but was told they won't survive, so in-laws turned their back on me but a year later. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and despair, the kind that clings to your skin like damp fog. I was alone, my screams still echoing in my skull from 12 hours of labor, only to be told my triplets, my miracles, wouldn't make it past the night. The doctor's voice was clinical, his eyes avoiding mine, as if my grief was too heavy for him to carry. I named them anyway: Lily, Noah, and Grace. Each one was a whisper of life, fragile as a candle in a storm. Their tiny chests rose and fell in the NICU, hooked to machines that beeped like a cruel metronome. My husband, Mark, was there, his hand trembling in mine, but his parents, my in-laws, stood at the door, their faces carved from stone. "We can't do this. Elena," his mother, Patricia, said, her voice sharp as a blade. "You're young. You'll have others." They left before the sun rose, their footsteps fading down the sterile hallway, abandoning us to our private war. I was 28, a first-time mother, and the world had just split open beneath me. Mark and I had dreamed of these babies for years, through fertility treatments and tears, through every negative test that felt like a punch to the gut. Now they were here, but the doctors said their lungs were too weak, their hearts too small. Less than a 5% chance, they told us, as if percentages could measure the weight of a mother's love. I sat by their incubators, whispering their names, begging them to fight. Mark tried to be strong, but I saw the cracks in his resolve, the way his shoulders slumped when he thought I wasn't looking. The first week was a blur of fear and defiance. I refused to leave the hospital, sleeping in a chair that dug into my spine, my body still aching from childbirth. Nurses came and went, their pitying glances like salt in a wound. One of them, Nurse Clara, was different. She had kind eyes and a voice that felt like a warm blanket. "They're fighters, Elena," she said one night, her hand on my shoulder. "Just like you." Her words were a lifeline, pulling me from the edge of surrender. But the in-laws' absence was a wound that festered. Patricia called once, her voice clipped, saying they couldn't handle the emotional burden. Mark's father, Richard, didn't even bother to call. They'd always been distant, their wealth and status a wall between us. But I never expected this. They'd promised to help, to be there for their grandchildren. Instead, they sent a check, $10 as if money could replace their presence. I tore it up, my hands shaking with rage, and Mark didn't stop me. "They don't deserve to know them," he said, his voice breaking. Days turned into weeks, and the triplets defied the odds. Lily was the first to breathe on her own, her tiny hand curling around my finger like a promise. Noah followed, his eyes opening one morning, bright and curious, as if he'd decided the world was worth seeing. Grace was the last, her heart monitor finally steady after a month of false alarms. Every milestone was a victory, but it came at a cost. Mark lost his job, he couldn't focus, couldn't leave my side. Our savings dwindled, and the hospital bills piled up like a mountain we'd never climb. Friends sent meals, but their visits grew rare, as if our pain was contagious. I kept a journal, scribbling every detail of their progress: Lily's first smile, Noah's soft coo, Grace's stubborn grip. It was my anchor, proof that we were moving forward, even when it felt like the world was against us. Clara read it one night, tears in her eyes. "You're writing their story," she said. "Don't stop." So I didn't. I wrote about the fear, the hope, the way Mark and I clung to each other like shipwreck survivors. I wrote about the in-laws, to their betrayal a shadow that lingered. 6 months in, the triplets were still in the NICU, but they were growing stronger. We celebrated their first Halloween with tiny costumes I sewed myself, pumpkins and ghosts draped over their incubators. The nurses joined in, sneaking us cupcakes, and for a moment, it felt like we were a normal family, but normal was a fantasy. Mark's parents sent a card, no apology, just a generic "thinking of you." I wanted to scream, to demand they face the grandchildren they'd written off. Instead, I tucked the card away, another reminder of their cowardice. The turning point came at 8 months. The doctors called us in, their faces unreadable. I braced for the worst, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. "They're ready to go home, doctor," Patel said, a smile breaking through his usual stoicism. I collapsed into Mark's arms, sobbing, laughing, a mess of emotions I couldn't name. The triplets were coming home not as statistics, but as our children, our miracles. Bringing them home was like stepping into a new world. Our tiny apartment felt like a palace, filled with their cries, their warmth. We were exhausted, broke, and happier than we'd ever been. I decorated their cribs with stars, whispering their names each night like a prayer. But the in-laws' absence still stung. They hadn't called, hadn't asked about the babies they dismissed as doomed. I wanted to hate them, but hate was too heavy to carry alongside my joy. A year after their birth, I stood in our living room, watching Lily, Noah, and Grace giggle on a blanket, their eyes bright with life. They were small but fierce, each with a personality that shone through Lily's curiosity, Noah's mischief, Grace's quiet strength. Mark was back at work, a new job that barely covered the bills. But we were making it. Clara visited sometimes, her laughter filling the room, a reminder of the kindness that had carried us through. Then the doorbell rang. It was Patricia and Richard, their faces pale, their eyes darting nervously. They'd heard about the triplets' survival through a mutual friend. "Not us. We want to see them," Patricia said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I wanted to slam the door, to make them feel the pain they'd caused. But Mark squeezed my hand, a silent plea for peace. I let them in, my heart a battlefield of anger and hope. They stood over the triplets, their eyes wide with something like awe. Patricia reached for Lily, then stopped, her hand trembling. "We were wrong," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Richard nodded, his usual arrogance gone. They stayed for an hour, awkward and quiet, holding the babies they'd once abandoned. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. That night, I wrote in my journal, "They lived, we fought, and we're still here." The triplets' laughter was my proof, their breath my victory. I didn't know if I could ever fully trust my in-laws again, but I knew one thing: my children were a miracle, and no one could take that away. What do you think? Was I right to let them back in? Or should I have protected my family from their past betrayal? Share your thoughts, because every story deserves a voice. Wyndham.